if our promise was successful, we resolve and say operation was successful. And if it was rejected, we do what? We say operation failed. So now we have a promise instance that we can work with. Then we can now come here and say promise.then. Now come here and say promise.then. Now we know that for us to have access to the then callback, that means our promise was what? Our promise was successful. So then we can have access to the callback. And now we can come in here and say, okay, our promise has been successful. What do we want to do? Let's print the result. And what we would expect here is what? Operation was successful. And now the catch, if our promise was not successful, let's do what? We would have an error. And we can do what? We can print the error as well to our console and say console.log error. And what this will say is what? Operation failed. So now what happens here is we have our promise instance that we've initialized here. If success is let's success is true, we resolve and say operation was successful. And if it failed, we say what? We reject and say operation failed. Then this promise instance that we have created here, we have initialized here, anyway, it keeps importing that. Then we can now come in and use that instance and say, okay, since if you are successful, then I want you to do this for me. I want to, so is using that example of our restaurant. So if our order was fulfilled,
So it's quite done.
if our order was fulfilled, then we are not going to do what? We are going to eat the food. For example, using our restaurant example, if your order was fulfilled and they bring the food, that's when we do what? We eat the food. But if an error occurred and they say they don't have rice anymore, that means an error has occurred and we call the catch callback and we do what? We walk out or say, oh, why didn't you tell me this initially? I'm very hungry, or this or that. And then we can come here and say, finally. We can say finally. Let's say, can now come here and say finally. The promise is done. Or just say finally, I am done. So we can see that in here, we said the success is true. That's why it said operation was successful. But if we change this to false, who can guess what will happen? Our promise will do what? We reject and say operation failed. And will it come into the then block if it fails? If it fails, will it come into the then block? No. It will go to the catch callback. And the catch callback will print the error that says what? Operation failed. So let's look at that. So can we see it goes into the catch callback and that one
Sir,
says what? Okay.
I'm not seeing your screen, or maybe I'm I log out, log in, the same thing. I don't know, maybe I'm the only one.
Can anyone see my screen?
Yes, sir. I
Yes,
guess it's
sir.
our
I think maybe
network.
their network.
Yes. Okay. Maybe you can try logging out and logging in again. At least you can see you can see this code that I'm showing, Rabi.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I was scared that I've been talking to myself since. Okay. So that is simply what. So now here we say our promise was a success. So if successful, we return operation was successful. And if it failed or if success is false, we do what we reject. And once we reject, that means you rejected the promise. With our promise instance, you use the catch block to do whatever I want to do with the error when our promise rejects. And that is And that is that. Any questions? We're moving on to promise chaining.
Sir, before you move on,
Okay.
that dot then, it is
Yes.
only when you have a success that your promise can go to that dot then.
Yes.
Okay.
It's only when your promise is fulfilled that you can go to the then. If it is not a success, that means it's only when it is resolved. Resolved means it's a success, it has been fulfilled. But if the promise is rejected, it cannot come to the then. It will come to the catch, which is where the error is, and it will tell you what happened. Then finally, this finally is independent. This finally callback is independent of either it is fulfilled or it is rejected. Either it is resolved or it is rejected. Finally happens regardless of the situation of things. This means I want to do something after every other thing has happened. I don't care if it was resolved or it was rejected. That's what finally does.
So, sir, it means that let's assume it failed. That means this dot then will not have it again. That
This
step will not be there.
it will be there, but it will not run. Do you get
Okay,
it will,
okay.
do you understand? It will be here. Like for example, now if we set success to false, if we set success to false, and that is Rukayat Abi.
Yes, sir.
Let's print Rukayat. So let's see if we will have your name. Let's try to print your name. If we set success to false, can you see your name? We,
No.
we can't see your name. What does that mean? That means our code never came into the .dem block. Do you understand?
Okay, sir.
It never came into the .dem block because we set it to reject. I mean, success was false, meaning we told it to reject, and that is why it never came into this .then callback. This callback was never triggered. But if we set it to true and it is resolved, then it will go into the .then, and we will see Rukayat here. Now we can see Rukayat. So a .then is only triggered when your promise is resolved or fulfilled. Let's now go to promise chaining. Please ask questions though. These parts are very sensitive parts of programming as a whole because you will always use promises. So you need to understand how promises work. In fact, we use promises as long as you're a programmer. Always. So promise chaining. What does promise chaining mean? Promise chaining is simply the method of performing a series of asynchronous operations. Let me space this very well. Okay, so promises can be changed to perform a series of asynchronous operations in sequence. Now, what does that mean? Each .then always returns a new promise that allows for chaining. So when a .then is resolved, you can chain another .then to that .then that was resolved to do something else, and you have what you have. Now you can use chaining to handle multiple asynchronous tasks in a reading manner. Let's look at an example of what this means. Do you want me to put this example for us under the notes so we can see it there? Okay, so now let me put this here. So now, promise chaining. So now let's say we have. This is what promise chaining now means. Let's say we have an example that does what? Let's say we resolve in our promise here. We resolve with 10, with number 10. So what does this mean? What we want to do here is, let's forget the rejects. We are not rejecting. What does this mean? Now, yeah, we know that we will always be in this .then. You're still not seeing the screen. Let me stop sharing and share again. Has she dropped off? She has dropped off. Toby Abidoye, are you with us?
Yes, sir. Yes, I'm with you, sir.
Okay. Okay. Can you still see? Can everyone still see my screen?
Yes, it's loading.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Let's wait for her to join back and see if she can see it now. So let's say we have a promise that resolves the number 10. The number 10. So what this simply means is when we call promise .10 here, our result value here will be what? Who can guess? Who can guess what our result value here will be? Please, let's be interactive. Who can guess what our result value will be? It will be 10 because we are resolving the number 10 here. So whatever it is, whatever this call, so this .then callback will return whatever was resolved in the promise. Do you get? So we have 10 here. So now what promise chaining now does is we can come here and do something like this. We can say we want to return the result times 2. So now when we return the result times 2, we can come here and chain another promise, another .then promise, and say, okay, this particular result that I have here, I want to do something with it again. I want to resolve it by, I want to take this result to, I want to multiply it by what? By another 2. I can come again and say, okay, when that particular promise is done, I want to do something with this result again. I want to multiply it by it should be return. I want to multiply it by another what? Another 2. And now, okay, at the end, just in case anything happens, let's do what? Let's catch our error and say what? And do what? Log our error. Who can guess what this number is going to be when we run it? Quickly guess. Before I run it, who can tell me what we're going to have after running it?
80. 80 or 60.
Okay, how did you arrive at that? Let's do it together. So we know that here we resolved with what? 10. So that means in here, our result will be what? Will be 10. But then we told you that this 10, take it and multiply it by 2. That will be what? So here we have what? 20. So here we have what? 20. So we are returning 20 to this promise. So this promise now comes. When this promise comes, what does it have? It has 20, right? At this point, this promise has 20. It takes that 20, multiplies it by what? By another what? 2. So now we have what? 40. It takes 40 here. So at this point, this promise has 40. Here it comes what? What does it do? It multiplies that 40 by another 2. It has what? 80. So now 80 is our final answer. Let's run it and see what we have. We didn't console it. Let's console it here. No need returning it. Let's just console it in here. So you can see 80. So that's basically how promise chaining works. So with promise chaining, you can chain multiple promises together. So let me do this let me look at a real world scenario. Let me explain with a real world scenario for us. So let's say, for example, you fetch someone's data from an API, or you're even trying to run a computation. Let's say you're a calculator, you're building a calculator, and when the user runs the first calculation, you want to use that calculation to do you want to use that result to process another calculation again. So you can easily say, maybe a Fibonacci sequence or something. So you can easily say, at this point, when you have the result of this, I want you to do this next. And when you are done with that, I want you to do this next. When you are done with that, I want you to do something else next. So you can chain multiple promises along that particular process, and they would all execute. So that's basically what promise chaining does. So it basically helps us chain promises in a very neat and readable, chain asynchronous tasks in a very legible and readable manner. So now you can see what this code does legibly. So let's look at something called async await. What's the time? It's already 8 o'clock. Let's just do 10 minutes. I think we can finish async await. Let's do async await. Okay, so what is so now async await is basically still promises, but this time around you are writing it in a different way, in the sense that you are using it as asynchronous. You are calling your function as asynchronous functions, and using the await keyword for asynchronicity to tell your process to wait for a result before, to tell your process not to wait for a result, that process is asynchronous. What does that mean? I will explain to us now. So converting promises to async await. Async await are basically a syntactic sugar built on top of promises, making asynchronous code look more like what? More like synchronous code. And an async function declares an asynchronous function, while what? An await pauses the function, pauses the execution of an async function until a promise is resolved. What does this mean? We can have a function and that says what? Let's say, for example, we have a function. Let me copy this example here before we delete it. Have I pressed? Okay, it should be under here. So now we have what? Okay. So now let's say we have a function that does what? That fetches data from an API. We will still do more APIs and fetching data later. But let's just say we have a particular function that fetches data, and this is a promise. Sorry. And this is a promise. Now, this returns a what? This returns a promise that does what? This returns a promise that does what? Let's have a timeout. What does the timeout do? Let's say the timeout has a 2-second delay, and it returns what? Data fetched. It resolves with data fetched successfully. Okay. So it returns missing a closing. This is the close of this. This is the close of this. This is the close of this. This should be the close of this. Okay. So it's complete now. So let's say we have a promise that does what? Let's just assume we are fetching data here, and it returns data after 2 seconds. So what set timeout does is introduces a delay. It's a JavaScript function for delaying the time a process runs. So we can easily specify the delay time here. So I basically told you that it takes a callback, that resolves data fetch and returns data fetch successfully after 2 seconds. So this is the delay time that we've set it to. And I can easily come here now. Now, because this returns a promise, I can easily come here now and say function async. Let's call this async function. I believe you still remember how we used to define functions. So let's say function, async function. So let's call this fetch today. Fetching data. So let's say this async function logs fetching data. And const data equals let's do something first. Now let's console the data after it has fetched it. So now this function that we have here is what? Is a promise. So what do we think is going to happen when we run this? Let's run it. Can you see what happened? This was still running. This was supposed to return after 2 seconds. But because of the way this function was called, this function is a promise. Because of the way it was called, our async function didn't wait to get a response before it moved on. And now data here is empty. How do we know this? Let's do something. I am empty. Let's do this. Yeah. It's not even. Okay. Let's just do this. So function async. What I was trying to explain, we can't just without method. It won't be empty anymore. Unexpected identifier function. It should be async function rather. Sorry. Something is wrong with our example. Let me see what this returns. I'm not calling it. Okay, I've seen the reason why. I didn't call our function. Let me just give this a different name. Our async function. So let me call our async function somewhere here. So we can see that this returned what? It returned a promise. So it said what? Fetching data. The next thing, it did what? When we call this fetch data, this data, the only thing we were able to get out of it was what? Our promise or our what? IOU, meaning I owe you. And what does it say? It says pending. But it looks like because this function is not asynchronous, it didn't wait to get a response before it ran off. It's like I don't know if you can remember the way we are children when you want to send a child something and they take money and they run away without even waiting to listen to what you told them to buy. They just run. Or a child comes to buy something and they are going and they didn't collect their change. That's exactly what this behavior is. So the behavior behaves like a synchronous function. It doesn't know that this is a promise. So it doesn't wait. While the promise is still pending, it just ran away and left without getting a feedback. So now this is why we are meant to use async await. So when we now say this is, and we tell you that this is an async function, and we tell you that this is asynchronous. So wait for a response from fetch data before you run away. So what will that do now? It will come in and say, okay, I think now it recognize that, okay, this function is an async function. Okay, there's an await here. That means I have to wait for something. I won't print this until I have a response from from this function. Either it is resolved or it is rejected, but I must make sure I get something before I go away. So what now happens? Fetching data, and after 2 seconds, it comes back and says what? Data fetched successfully. Do you get? So now it's not, it doesn't run away with the promise pending anymore. And is that clear, or any question as regards that?
Please, can you come over it again?
Okay.
That fetch that.
Okay. So now this fetch data simply mocks, we are using it to mock or mimic an API call. Now, what does this mean? When we make API calls to the internet, we don't receive it immediately. It takes a while. So we are assuming that we are assuming that it take a while to talk about 2 seconds. So we are creating a promise. Now we're creating a promise that resolves after 2 seconds. So what this means is this function, this callback, will not run until after this 2000 milliseconds. This is 2000 milliseconds. 2000 milliseconds, which means 2 seconds. I believe we still remember the conversion of this. 2000 milli simply means 2000 times 10 raised to power, where is that? 10 raised to power minus 3.
-3.
Exactly. So we know that this 2000 milliseconds is what? 2 seconds. So now we're telling our function that we want you to resolve after 2000 milliseconds. And we're using what? This sets timeout. So set timeout basically does what? Introduces a delay based on the time you have specified. So you're telling me that set timeout to wait for 2 seconds. After 2 seconds, resolve our function. So this basically mimics an API call or an API. I'll explain what APIs are later, so I don't want us to get confused too much. But we just say when you're reaching out to the internet to get data, you are calling an API. So and that depends on your network speed, how fast your internet is, and all of that. So let's say this one takes about 2 seconds. And now we have our function, our asynchronous function. So let's assume we've not told you to wait for anything. We have our asynchronous function that is meant to fetch that data. So we call the fetch data, and it assigns that data into a data variable here. And we do what we print that data. So if we print this data now, what we are going to get what we are going to get is the promise instance with the status of what? The promise object, the status of what? Pending. Because this promise has not been resolved. This promise was supposed to take 2 seconds to be resolved. But because our function is not asynchronous, it doesn't know that it's supposed to wait. It just came here, called it, and moved on. It doesn't recognize that this function is asynchronous. So it just came here and moved on and printed what? It printed data. But at this point now, data is what? Is a promise that has a status of what? Of pending, because it has not been resolved yet. So what we had to do was now, we told our function that, okay, this function is asynchronous. It's asynchronous. And we want you to do what? To await a response from fetch data. Now, a response will either be what? Will either be fulfilled or rejected, it be a fulfilled state or a rejected state. So it's either resolved or rejected. But we just know that I want you to wait. Don't come back and give me pending. Get a response back, either fulfilled or rejected, or get something back before you come back to me. So what that does here now is it awaits here, and when we run it again now, it comes back and can you see it waits for 2 seconds before printing anything to us. Let's do something quickly. Let's see if we can fetching data. There's nothing we can do in the. Don't let me complicate us. I wanted us to print something while the process is still pending. So basically, you can see the delay. So if we set it to 5 seconds, we will see that the time delay will even be longer. So we can see that it is fetching data. So it has to wait for 5 seconds before it now does what and comes back to tell us that what data has been fetched because of the delay. But if we don't use async, it won't wait for that 5 seconds. It will just go. It will just call fetch data and continue as if it has something but it doesn't have anything. It didn't wait for this function to finish and bring a response before it continued. It just ran off like that. So that's the essence of using async await for asynchronicity. And also error handling. So the way we have let's say, let me make that a subtopic for us again. What's the time? Let's just make error handling the last part and we close for today. Let me copy this example. Yeah, forgotten what I wanted to do. Let me copy the example for us and paste it there. So so now we have that there. The next thing is what? Error handling. So error handling is simply what we've been seeing previously. And this is how we do what? How we catch our errors in async await. So error handling in async await is done by using what? Try catch blocks to catch errors. Now, instead of using so we can either use our promise or use our .then.catch, or we use what? Try catch if we would decide to use what? Async and await. What does this mean? Let's look at this example. So let's say this function, after 2 seconds, it doesn't resolve, it rejects. And it says, and it rejects and says, problem don't dey. So what does this mean? There is a reject with an error. This is not successful. This is a rejected state. So when we come here, so who can guess? Do you think our async await to be able to catch whatever happens in here? Let's see. Fetching data, and everything breaks apart. Now, what does this say? This says unhandled promise rejection. This error originated either by throwing inside of an async function without a catch block, or by rejecting a promise which was not handled with a dot catch. What this simply means is this our function currently now is not handling a catch. So if anything happens, it's going to break our code apart, which is why we need to use a try catch block. So now what this a try catch block does is, what it says is, if my function is successful, try to do something. If it is successful, do it in the try catch block and continue. But if any other thing happens and my function is not, and my operation is not successful, I want you to do I want you to do something for me. I want you to give me whatever error has happened. So let's say we want to console the error that happened. So we console the error that happened, and we come here now and say fetching data, and it says error, problem don't dey. So now we can see that our code is no longer breaking. So if our promise gets rejected, or if we are trying to call a particular API service and we are not getting a response back from the API, or you are trying to go to google.com and Google is not going through on your phone, your code won't, whatever browser you are on, the code won't break, the UI won't break, because you've used a try catch. So all you will do is get an error, a nice error back that basically says what happened rather. So now we can see with a try catch block, if our statement is successful, we get it in the try, and if any error happens, we nicely catch it in the catch block and print it out. So now we can see our error that says problem don't dey has been handled in there as well. Any question? Let's close for the day. Any question? Any question? You have any question? Ramat, Toby. Did Toby drop off? Ramat, Rukayat, any question?
No, sir. I'll be expecting the notes, sir, so I can go through it.
Okay, I'll send the notes. I think this boy has even dropped off. What's his name? Tunde has dropped
I
off.
think it's
Yeah.
network.
Okay, I'll send the notes. I understand. I'll send the notes now.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, sir.
All right. See you next week. So, Che, you arrange with the class and let them know that we are moving it to 6 p.m. Abi, so we can finish by 7.